Hey everybody! Welcome back again. It's another Thursday night at Home with Olympus. We are going live again tonight. We're going to have a new guest. If you didn't join us 2 weeks ago, we did have Jay Dickman on, and he did a recap on the benefits of using the PSA and M modes. If you didn't view that one, you should definitely check out both our Facebook page and our YouTube page and go review that one. For tonight, we're going to change gears a little bit and get into some travel and adventure photography. But before that, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping things, same as every week. Yes, these are being recorded. You can definitely view them at a later date. And in fact, we would encourage you to do that and share that with your friends. And at the end of this session, we will go through a Q&A live so we can ask questions to our presenters live at the end of every session. Tonight, we are going to be welcoming special guest Olympus Explorer Chris Poplawski. So let's get him on here. Hey, Chris. How's
How's
it
it going?
going?
Good. It's sunny here and really hot, so I'm glad to be sitting in the AC and just hanging out for a bit with you guys.
I wish I had AC. You're in California too, right?
Yep, I'm currently in Chino, California.
Oh, so you know all of my pain of the nonstop heat this summer that we've been
Oh yeah,
experiencing.
it has been hot.
It's been painful. So we've got a lot of people on here. Apparently, it's midnight in the Netherlands. Somebody told me. So thank you for joining us at midnight. It's way past my bedtime at midnight. So thank you for joining. And Mexico, Florida. I'm not sure where the Blue Ridge Mountains are, Jeff Clark. You'll have to tell us where those are.
I believe it's North Carolina.
Oh, wow. See, I did not pass geography, did I? So, Chris, what are you going to be talking to us about tonight?
Awesome. Well, first, thank you everyone for joining us, and Michaela, thanks for welcoming me. We're going to be covering kind of a wide variety of topics that I think will benefit pretty much anyone in any place. If you're traveling, if you're in a beautiful place, which as I'm seeing in the comments, there's lots of pretty places people are coming from. So hopefully I can give some tips about adventure photography and just immersing yourself in these places so you can pretty much just improve your photography and step up that. We're going to be talking a little bit about gear and prep, some foundational topics to outdoor photography that I think early on really helped me kind of grow. And even still today, I'm learning, applying, and kind of expanding, getting to some fun travel hacks, some inspiration that I think people will like, and also closing out with some editing tips from my favorite place, which I'll mention in a moment.
Oh, awesome. I love editing tips. I feel like that's where I'm always missing. So I'm going to make sure to take notes there. I'll be following along. So we just got a whole group
Awesome.
of people from Australia that commented at the same time. So welcome. The Australians just arrived. Hello. Good morning. All right. Well, I'm going to get out of your hair because, people hear me talk enough. And I'm going to pop your presentation on the screen so that we can see it as we go along. And remember, everyone, if you have questions, you can ask them as we go. We'll try to answer them in the chat. But if you have questions specifically for Chris, save them for the end, and we will do a Q&A session with him when he wraps up his presentation. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. All right, so it's been a minute since I've presented, but hopefully I can teach you guys a few things here and there. If you didn't catch, I'm Chris Poplawski. I'm an Olympus Explorer. I've been with Olympus for about 2 years now, and I've shot for about six. So it's been a really fun system for me to learn. It's greatly improved my travels, which we'll be getting into. I've shot in about 25 countries, and I still feel and I am still very young compared to legends like Jay Dickman, who spoke last week. So, when Olympus asked me to talk about some educational tips, I wanted to take a little bit of a spin on this and teach you guys just very, very fun topics that I love talking about with pretty much everyone. So, what do I shoot? I mostly focus on landscapes and adventure around the world. My favorite country of which has been the Farrell Islands. It's a beautiful destination, which is what I'm going to be talking about when we get to editing tips. Um, I work with brands that plays a huge role in how I'm able to travel. I get that question a lot. And my wife is also a wedding photographer, so I get to dip my toes in a little bit of wedding photography here and there with her. What is my, or actually, how did I get started? So let's get into that a little bit. Um, when I was graduating college, I had a job that I was kind of dipping my toes into as well. I didn't like it. I didn't get to do anything. I didn't get to travel. I barely got out on weekends. And sure enough, it just didn't fulfill me from a creative standpoint. So I needed to do something different. I told all my friends I'm going to start picking up a camera every weekend and just seeing if I can do anything and everything. It started with this like little dream, and all of a sudden I'm just like, okay, what can I do? Where can I go? I literally shot everything you could imagine, from any little tiny brands, rims, tires, real estate, friends that would want to go model, really just anything that would keep me out of an office and just shooting on my camera. So you can kind of see the journey that that has transformed to be on my Instagram. If you guys want to get to know me a little bit more, it's Chris Roams. We're going to be sharing a lot of images from that, also that page tonight that I'm going to be talking about. But real quick, just like a word of inspiration to all of you out there doing hopefully some amazing things and really pursuing photography. Everything you do, and I cannot stress this enough, everything you do with a photo, anywhere you end up, any picture you take of your family, use it as a building block to learning more. I feel like that's something that early on, when I applied it to all the little things I was doing, I see it popping up even in today's landscapes and the brands that I work with. That it helps me kind of take that next step and just find a little bit more creativity. It really helps me be committed to the process of just what creativity takes out of you. It's always very demanding if you're doing this full time. But hopefully tonight I don't overwhelm you with that. I overwhelm you more with just educational tips. So, why adventure photography? The impact of just adventuring, I feel like, really, really impacts a person. Spending time outdoors instead of stuck inside like some of us have been over the last year, it just fulfills me personally and helps me stay very, very just invested into where we're going. It's kind of allowed me to slow down and speed up. So I kind of control this adventure we're speaking of, in the places I'm able to go. So my schedule is very much depicted by the destination. If we're hiking, obviously it's very demanding for a few days, but then when you get to pitch your camp in the middle of the wilderness, you're there for a day or 2 days or 3 days, and everything slows down. So it really allows you to step back, look at photography and what you're trying to do there, and just kind of grow. Endless photo opportunities when it comes to adventure photography, from wildlife to landscapes to friends to brands to you name it. I mean, if you want to shoot plants and foliage and pretty much anything that you can kind of dive down any direction you want. And also, it's kind of opened up this doorway for me that I didn't embrace early on, which is kind of a raising awareness. The more we all want to travel and the more things that people are doing in the world, it's definitely kind of creating this tourism boom. If you've booked a flight lately, you probably know how crazy the airports are getting, at least here in California. So I like to try to educate people and talk a little bit more about how we can respect nature and how we can kind of just, you know, take in these views from a beautiful place, not something we're stepping into and maybe abusing. So why Olympus? I have traveled a lot and I've broken a lot of gear. Not with Olympus, fortunately. It's been with other brands that I won't necessarily mention, but water, dust, sand, all sorts of things have kind of just ruined gear for me. And it's been very stressful, especially being on a job. Olympus, the one thing I've loved more than anything is that they are dust proof, splash proof. They're weather sealed for the most part, and the way they're constructed is just very, very instrumental to the things I'm doing. Since I'm always in different settings and environments, I never really know what's going to happen. So I just know going into that with Olympus gear, it's easy to take places because they're so lightweight and compact, but they're also just so durable. Um, I've also learned, and I'm sure all of you know because I'm assuming everyone is Olympus driven here, they have amazing optical performance. I love the fact that you can use almost any lens for macro photography, which is not something I'm used to, especially with like a wide angle lens with my 7 to 14 millimeter. And then also something minor is that manual focus clutch where you can kind of toggle back and forth between autofocus and manual. I find that very, very useful when I'm shooting. And last but not least, color science. That's what's really impacted my photography. Olympus has just brought back colors to my style of photography, where early on it almost felt moody the way I would edit and kind of capture things. So now I just feel like colorful again. It almost brightens my day, and it allows me to really capture the blues and the greens and the yellows and a lot of the colors that you'd see in my work. And it really just kind of amplifies, I think, my style of creativity. So, planning for photo trips is something I wanted to get into. Um, the first thing I do is I go on Google Maps. I take a screen grab of wherever I'm traveling. So this could be Iceland. In this case, I put on the Farrell Islands. It could be a road trip of different countries. So I print out like each one for each country. Or if you're in like a smaller location like Yosemite National Park, you can do that as well. I basically put little bullet points on each spot I've researched, and on the back of the sheet, I read a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 list, numerical order of whatever I'm bullet pointing, and I pretty much lay out everything that has to do with this adventure. I really like to be prepared for these trips. It's very, very important to be prepared. So when you're able to document everything you've researched, from the sunrise time to the hike length to the cost of entry if you have to pay, what time to show up if you've researched those things, I find it very, very useful in having like a paper copy. If you run out of service, you're going to have everything you need in front of you, so you know exactly where to go. It also just kind of helps to have this visual representation of like, all right, today I can maybe do 3 things if we're driving around all day, and I know exactly what's in the area. Another secret tip that I love telling people is, for the longest time now, I've been making Instagram albums, and it sounds probably very far-fetched, but every time I'm scrolling on Instagram, oop, what is, every time I'm scrolling on Instagram, sorry, I'm getting a FaceTime call. That was unexpected. Um, every time I'm scrolling on Instagram, basically, I save a photo to its corresponding country or city or whatever it may be. So when I'm like popping up and I'm like, hey, next month I'm going to be in New York, or I'm going to be in the Faroe Islands, I already have some sort of predetermined list of places that have been photographed that are beautiful that I want to go see for myself. And then I kind of already have a start. So instead of researching top 10 places in the Faroe Islands, which a lot of people may do when they're going there for the first time, I've kind of already saved all of those, but through photography, through photographers and the community and all the valuable resources that are out there. And as I'm traveling, I'm also able to add locations to this map. So I find that just kind of like a fun, unique um, way of researching and planning as you go. I'm not sure. I think my computer lagged out. Let me make sure it's working. Sorry, guys. So here we go. All right. So next up, do your research. If you're going on these hikes, make sure you acquire the right permits for anything, know what kinds of wildlife you may cross paths with, especially if you're in like Grizzly County. A lot of tourists or people going to areas for the first time might not be prepared for those situations. If you listen to other Home with Olympus videos with like Brooke Bartleson, she talks a lot about that stuff. So it's really cool to kind of just be prepared. What to do when you cross paths, what's the weather like, do you have enough water, make sure you have a leave no trace mentality, read the signs. I find a lot of people just kind of showing up and going. Make sure you read the signs, and also respect the land. Cannot emphasize that enough. It's just one of those things that I think as photographers we need to be mindful of. If we see someone doing the wrong thing, like crossing paths with a bison and they're getting too close for a selfie, we should all be raising awareness and kind of focusing on being the better half of nature, just trying to educate while we're out there. I've also had crazy situations in areas I've been shooting where I've been robbed. I've been scammed in other countries that are fun, long stories to tell, but we won't get into that tonight. I could have been better prepared, knowing that the areas I was traveling, other travelers have gone through that. So just make sure you do your research. Do you know everything you need for that job or that location that you're traveling? It can be very daunting at times if you're stepping into a new place with no research done. So let's get into photography now that we got all that out of the way. When you show up to a location, and this could be anything from a backcountry wilderness hike to getting off a plane and being in a country you've never been in, to even your backyard and going seeing something new, have a vision. Do you have one when you step foot into it? Are you able to survey before you get there, which is something I love to do. So obviously I like to show up for sunrise and sunset, but knowing that if I can get there even 2 hours earlier and I can stand there and I can find rocks that are down by the water, or I can find a tree that I really like, to kind of compose in the image, whatever it may be, if you can get there early and you can kind of just breathe, you're not just like jumping into your camera and trying to just get what you see with your eye. Stepping back and being able to look for those unique features that really create a beautiful moment for you, that's how you can tell a story more prominently with your photos. I find myself rushing all the time, especially if I'm running late, so I can't always survey, but that's also what Instagram can be used for as a tool. So if you're able to and you kind of are predisposed to this environment, it's a disputed topic, right? Do you want to show up and take the same photo, or do you want to have some sort of um, you know, predisposure to this location? You can use Instagram to kind of be like, okay, I know a lot of people take photos over there, and I'm not going to go over there quite yet. I'm kind of going to walk around and survey and just kind of use things to my advantage. So if you have photo pills, I love using that app, especially if you're shooting astrophotography. It will show you where the sun's going down behind the mountains or the peaks. It shows you where the Milky Way is going to be later. If you're hiking, especially, and you've never heard of Gaia or All Trails, measuring your elevation that you're going to be hiking up, pretty much anything to prepare you for how long this hike may take you. It kind of just how it allows you to lay out the day and understand where you're stepping foot into. So composition, composition, and composition. That's one of the big things I wanted to cover today. It sounds very basic, and I know you've all heard a ton about it, and we probably all have heard a ton about settings and what to use when we go places, but I cannot overemphasize the importance of composition. It is one of the few things that early on, as I was kind of learning adventure photography and how to just show up at these locations and walk away with something unique, something that I feel very confident over, and something that I can just show other people from a social setting. If you master composition and you know how to maybe apply the rule of thirds, which is something we hear often, mentally dividing up this image without even a camera in your hand into two horizontal and two vertical lines, and you can figure out exactly where you want to lead the eyes of your viewer. If you're going to be using a shallow depth of field to create this visual balance in the work, you got to practice it. It's not something I just like was born with and I showed up on my first landscape and I just applied it. It was something that I just took a ton of photos of. And sometimes I'd walk away with like 1,000 images from a hike like this, and I'd maybe have like 2 or 3 compositions. And now I feel much more confident in how I want to kind of put my imagery forward. But when you actually kind of going backwards here, step back and you breathe and you survey these landscapes, it kind of allows you to see like, well, with the lens I'm using and I'm going to photograph this with, you can see where to place a subject. You can see where Megan, who's my wife in this photo, is kind of placed, and you can see all of her. She pops on the blue with what she's wearing, and she's not a distraction to what I wanted to shoot, which is the peaks during blue hours. So kind of stepping back, guiding your viewer through that photo. Maybe if you have leading lines, this photo doesn't necessarily have that, but anything that you can find and place in your composition to kind of bring out that landscape, it's going to greatly improve over time. You have to be very patient with it. It's something that I feel like you can always be masterminding, no matter how long you've been doing this, for 40 years, 10 years, 2 years, whatever it is. Composition is always going to be something we can talk about. And if you shoot with a wide angle lens like I do most of the time, a 7 to 14 millimeter, post cropping is always a huge benefit. When you're editing, you can always kind of bring it back and redefine how you want to frame it. Establishing your subject is a very simple concept: before, in the moment, or after. What are you going to be photographing? For me, in a lot of places, it's people, because as we're going to get into the next slide, it brings a sense of scale. But if you can establish this before, especially, it's going to help you improve your work, because you already know what you're photographing and you're not showing up just with like, what am I going to do here? In the moment, if you're able to see something or meet someone, or maybe a wildlife is present, or like some sort of wildlife is present, it's going to just kind of happen, and you're hopefully able to just apply what you already had in mind before using a subject. and kind of grow in that area. So for me, if you can establish a subject, that's going to be a huge benefit to removing any variables that might distract you or make it hard to shoot. And then when you're also able to add people, I think, or anything for that matter, you can kind of see Sage in the bottom corner of this photo as well, which is my dog. It adds a sense of scale. So oftentimes when we're viewing things, you need to, I at least like to put the viewer into the photo. So if I'm able to maybe say you could be standing here, especially in a place I've never been and I never even realized I was going to be photographing, if placing someone there, it's going to create this new dimension to the photo. So you're going to be able to look at a mountain, you're going to be like, wow, that's a massive landscape. And that person and how small they are or big they are, wherever it is, it's going to add a piece to that puzzle that just kind of immerses everyone in your composition. So using a human, for example, it's an object that we know. It's something that we can relate to, that we've all maybe taken a photo of. So we know looking past that just how big this place is. A lot of people ask me, how do you create that effect? Well, it's just messing with multiple lenses and multiple gear everywhere I go. If I'm remembering correctly, in this exact location, I probably tried 2 or 3 different lenses until I felt like I was using the correct focal length. Obviously, I ended up around 30 millimeters. It's somewhere I kind of usually end up. So I would just mess around as much as you possibly can with different lenses, especially while you're traveling. Being mobile is also another thing. I use this term a lot when I'm talking with people, is you're stuck in your height. So you walk up to a location, you're standing there and you take a photo. You're not moving, you're not trying to get in different angles. Oftentimes with a tripod, it's also a similar context. You're stuck in a height, right? Maybe you can adjust it an inch or two, but I prefer personally to be very, very mobile. I don't like to follow the crowds. At times, there's obviously a time and a place for that. But if I see a group of people shooting this landscape and I know I can see the composition and I'm very much aware that that's something people commonly shoot, I'm going the other way. Mostly because I want to end up with something unique. I'm maybe looking for some sort of foreground to deepen the photo. Or sometimes I'll even lay down, which is something I did in this photo because I wanted to bring in the lines of the road. In this case, as a leading line, I feel like it draws us to the mountain and the van. So I kind of like to be very, very active, moving around, doing everything I can to shift it up and kind of not follow the crowds. And you'd be surprised of how much you see when you're willing to step out of kind of what everyone else is doing. Don't be afraid to facilitate. So kind of going back to, if you have a subject that you are working with, so a person, a wife, a friend, a dog, whatever it may be, and you can kind of direct them where you want this photo to hoist them or host them. I'm sorry, that was a weird word. But don't be afraid to facilitate. So anything in your control is something you can work with. Like I said, hey, move a foot to the right, move a foot to the left. You'll thank me later. It's really funny how when I started, my friends are like, "Oh, Chris is making me move around." But then when I show them the photo I just took of them, they thank me later. I'm serious about that. Be the facilitator of the photo you are trying to capture, because if you are just stepping up and you are saying, "Okay, I'm happy with that," but it doesn't look exactly how you want it, you might not be content with how that photo ends up later. You might not feel as compelled to share that image because you didn't really put that facilitation forward where you could have had them on a different rock and it looked that much better. And I'll tell you this, when I'm traveling, people are moving everywhere. I'm having that rock and that rock stood on and this rock and that rock. For this, it was kind of easy because it's snow and I just said go down. Go down at a slow rate. I already had the frame of the mountains where I wanted it and kind of the foreground of all the snow-capped trees. I just told that person to kind of go, and I caught it. I think being kind of in charge of how you want to compose images and kind of facilitate that, it really has changed at least the angles I've gotten with photography, because people are patient with me now and they know exactly how I want to do things when it comes to that. So starting somewhere with creative ideas. This was a photo of the moon I took for the very first time. I traveled for years, and then one day I realized I've really never taken a photo of the moon. Um, I didn't really have gear for it at the time. I had a 40 to 150, which is one of my favorite lenses from Olympus. So I just tried to frame it. I just tried to put it in a place where I thought it was a pretty photo. So I started somewhere. Just wanted to end up with a product that I felt good with. Um, it it kind of just dawned on me that, like, why don't I try to frame this subject and actually start pursuing it? So see those ideas through. If you are in nature or you have an idea before you get to a location that you just want to mess with, go after it. Use things that you can do to improve your work, like investing in that new lens that you've been wanting, and it's a longer telephoto. For example, this, which I'll get into in a minute, was shot with a telescope, but I've shot the same exact image with the 100 to 400, and it came out almost identical. And that was handheld, not even via a tripod shooting the moon. So pursue those ideas and see them through. And when you're getting into the outdoors, you experience a lot of new things. It's not always the same location that you're expecting. As you're hiking, you see things the whole hike. As you're driving, you see things that you can pull over and shoot. So kind of just use those ideas that you've had in the past and keep applying them. Even if it doesn't turn out to be the best photo, I have a very heavy finger, meaning I take a lot of photos, and oftentimes after a week, I walk away with like 10,000 to 15,000 photos. So for me in the moon, right, that first photo I took at a 40 to 150, I was like, okay, well, at least it's something. At least I should feel good that I have a photo of the moon now. And then the next time I showed up, it was putting a telescope on and putting on this Astromania T2 telescope mount onto my Olympus body, putting it in the draw tube. And for the first time ever, I'm just messing with settings, shooting an object. What is it? I think 238,000 miles away. Maybe that's probably not accurate, but it's far. And I've never ever photographed anything like that. I didn't read forums about it of what settings to use. I just wanted to let Olympus, with its image stabilization features and its technology that I know so well, and kind of put it to work and see what I can end up with. And sure enough, I was able to get close enough to the moon where I was like, wow, I've never taken an image like that before. So pursue the ideas. If you have a creative idea, I can't tell you enough just to kind of put yourself forward and see what you can do. If you guys are interested in shooting the moon, one little feature that I would recommend that I've used a lot is manual focus assist to magnify. So it kind of pulls you in closer to the subject as you're focusing. And then I also use I probably say it wrong, peaking settings to highlight the moon in red. So I know exactly what's in focus. Things like that is kind of those little moments where I've applied what I've read the day after trying it for the first time, and then I shoot the moon and I'm like, wow, where can I go next? So keep seeing those ideas and keep pushing them forward. And just remember, you don't always need the biggest and best gear if you can't afford it, to shoot creatively. If you can just kind of put yourself forward and see what you can come up with, and you know you want to shoot the moon, look for trees, look for branches, look for anything that you can put in the foreground to kind of add to that. So that's just a little tidbit. One thing, and I kind of already hit on this, is there's always more to shoot. So when you go to a location and you spend an hour taking as many compositions as you can, just remember, step away. Like I've already said 4 times, the second photo you see to the right is at the same location, and I've never seen it in my life. I've been here probably 6 times in this exact spot in the Farrell Islands, and it took me 6 visits to finally step back enough from Dranganir to finally see something different. So just remember, everywhere you go and everywhere you're traveling, everywhere you're adventuring, there's always more to shoot. So keep looking, keep stepping back, take that breathing moment where you're not so, into your camera, and just kind of photograph. For me, it's hard. I feel like as soon as I get out of the car, my camera's in my eye, and I struggle taking it down because I just want to take photos. I just always want to be shooting. So if you guys are like me in that sense, or you want to be looking for more, just keep looking around, keep doing things, lay down, roll over, do whatever you can do to kind of mix it up than being stuck in your height. I find it personally very, very rewarding when I take that step back. Um, Try new things. That's a challenge for me that I have embraced more and more as the years have passed. Um, I've been, like I said, I've been to places a ton of times, and I've never tried to mix it up. I've always shot more obey with a wide angle lens. I feel like it's just the way to shoot it when you show up. But for me, I put on a telephoto lens and I just saw a stranger. I saw a stranger walking the beach, and I was like, that's actually a really cool subject. And then I directed some friends to go over so I can kind of coordinate a little bit differently. And sometimes those random things that you're doing differently, it sparks a composition. Climb up something, just try to mix it up than what you would traditionally do, especially if you're in a home base and you're not traveling as much uh, right now, for example, but you're doing some of the same hikes you've always done. You can still mix it up and try new things. Um, there was one thing that Jay Dickman said last week that really stuck with me is that there's always a challenge and something to figure out with photography. And granted, he was, in a beautiful place, the Taj Mahal. We've probably all seen a million photos of it. Um, but for him, he kind of went over what program shift and what the effects that has on the water and how if you looked at those two images or you go back and watch it, you're like, wow, it's just one little educational tool that completely changes the composition and the look of this photo. So I cannot relate more to that. I'm a bit more unorthodox with my approach. Pretty much all manual. I don't use tripods. I'm mobile. I'm always kind of like moving, and snapping a lot. But the beauty of being an amateur, even a professional photographer, is you do have infinite possibilities to learn when you're traveling. You can apply yourself for 2 hours if you're lucky with a sunset, and you can try all sorts of things, all different types of settings. And for me, I didn't always do that. I set what I thought I should shoot at with like a f4. But then all of a sudden I kind of grow in the craft, and now I'm shooting more with f2.8 in these big landscapes. You'd almost think that's like defying the logic of shooting f9 so you can capture everything. But when you start getting into other, you know, choices and you just try new things, you really can mess around with your camera. Um, it's always a problem to solve, and I think you're always going to be surprised by what Olympus puts out because I've done things that just don't make sense with my gear. From an educational standpoint, it's not what someone would tell me to do, but just for the sake of trying it, and I've loved the outcome, like going to f2.8 and shooting a big, massive landscape. It's one of those things that you just keep applying yourself to. Um, Sometimes also, when you keep applying yourself, I've left places with a ton of photos, for example, but I didn't feel good about the outcome. I was like, oh, the weather wasn't good today, or I was tired and I didn't have like creativity in my mind. Um, when you shoot with a lot, Olympus's technology allows you to get home and edit. And that's one of the things that I don't really talk about too much, and why I want to get into that shortly here is when you can get home and you can edit. If you didn't get your settings correct while you were messing around and you got your favorite composition, odds are you can probably save that photo and bump the highlights down and kind of make it look like a sunset again. You could bump the shadows up if you shot it a little bit too dark. And I've done that countless times just to see the information I can pull from these photos. You'd be shocked at what these cameras are capable of. So when you're able to just mix it up, you might discover something just by trying new things. Like motion and unexpected events. This was shot as I was driving. A lot of people might think that's a little odd because I shouldn't be using a camera, and it wasn't like I was intending to. But one thing I like to say is that after I shoot, I don't know if you've ever, shot a sunset the night before, or you're shooting astro a lot. You go to bed and your camera's just turned off, and all your settings are super goofy. So when I am in standby mode, I guess you can call it, I make sure my camera settings are at like an operable level each time of the day. So when we're driving, I have my shutter speed all the way up, my ISO all the way down, and I hope that my f-stop is enough I can play with to like capture something like this. But there's always going to be something unexpected that could happen. You just never know when a deer is going to pop up that you can kind of add to the composition. If you're hiking, it could be mountain goats, it could be a bear, it could be anything. So I like to keep my settings in a place where if I just have to pull it up and take a quick photo, I can be close enough that I can play with that photo later, post processing, and kind of end up with something I'm happy with. Um, which is also something when you're shooting wildlife and you don't really know what to expect, it happens quick. Like if you're shooting whales surfacing or you're shooting dolphins that come up for a brief second and then go back down. If you love Olympus, you know all about sequential mode, which is something I use all the time. Sometimes I end up with hundreds of photos from it and I'm okay with it because when you can shoot, depending on what camera body you're using, 10 to 60 frames per second, you can capture every moment of that dolphin coming up and surfacing, and then later go through the photos and pick out exactly the moment you want. It makes the job pretty easy at times. I gave you kind of, if you don't know how to access that, kind of where to get to it. Pro Capture High also kind of guarantees you capture that moment if you're shooting something where it's unexpected. So for me, this was with dolphins. It We didn't know we'd come across anything on the boat. Then all of a sudden dolphins appear and you're like, I got to get shooting right away because you might only get the angle one time depending on who's on the boat with you. I use continuous autofocus tracking for something like this, especially because it allows me to be quick and precise and not always think deep about settings, but mostly just how can I put myself in the best situation to shoot right now. So something to consider when you're traveling, unexpected events or motion can happen quick, and those are two little tricks I guess you can use to counter that. Um, I wanted to talk a lot about foreground and foliage because we already got into composition. I feel like this was like the next level for me after I started mastering composition. When you really take the time to step back and you start looking at things differently, and if you're familiar with like Chris, that's also on the Olympus team. It's McGinnis, I think. He's just a master at shooting macro objects. And I can only imagine if it were to come to landscapes and if you're good at shooting these foliage moments or these little insects or whatever it is, you can step back and you know exactly the angles at which you shoot them. So I oftentimes take those foliage moments and I use it to complement my work. So I've spent a lot of time just shooting random plants, and it might be something I never publish, but for me personally, it's kind of a building block to landscape photography. I love it because if you look for patterns and textures that are natural elements to nature and to where you are, it just adds this feeling, this natural element to the photo itself. And it's also very immersive. It just trains your brain to like look at this and you think back and you don't just remember like, wow, that's a big cliff and there's a little person standing there for scale. You see the plants and you're like, wow, that place, like that whole hillside has plants like that growing on it. It kind of just puts the viewer in this creative framing that you've made, and all because you've mastered foliage and foreground. So take the time. Um, don't be afraid also when you're shooting landscapes to get down to f2.8, especially as it gets darker, and we'll cover that in a little bit, but just try to use foliage as much as you can in your photos. And I typically do that with f2.8. So if my focus is on the person and it's f2.8, the foliage is going to be blurry on the foreground in the bottom third, and everything else will be in focus in front of that. So it kind of just deepens the value and the depth of field to your photos. I'd spend a lot of time looking for windows, windows of plants, windows of branches, trees, whatever it might be. Try to use a telephoto if the trees are a little bit further and you kind of want to get the peak that's behind it. When we were in Japan, I just remember everyone shooting the cherry blossoms that were kind of going off everywhere. And it was just on the path. And all I had to do was hop off that path for a minute and I see more cherry blossoms, just more of a window. And I felt like it really kind of took away all the busyness that was happening, and it kind of traps the viewer in this place. So the focus is exactly what you want it to be. Just remember, kind of touching back on that topic we talked about earlier, work with the variables. So if you have a person or a friend, anyone there that you're working with, don't be afraid to kind of, tell them to take a step forward. I remember I was trying so hard to work with this plant to like get the foliage into this photo. I had to like bend a little branch, not break it because I would never want to do that, but I'd bend it just to get the leaves exactly where I wanted it so I can create just this foliage feeling on the side. So work with those variables. If you can direct your subject to get them in the middle of the frame or the outside, wherever you're looking, make sure you're spending time coordinating. Remember, facilitate. Also, don't forget your gear. That's another thing of a variable that I've had to work with. Is I get anxious and I jump out of the car to go take a photo, and the car is in a parking spot, and I got to run all the way back because I don't have the right lens with me. So take that extra second, grab the bag, and then when you get to that composition you're looking for, make sure you use those variables to your advantage. Control the foliage, control the model, and then also your gear. Let's see. There's other ways. Once I started shooting foliage a little bit more, it started opening up these other paths to shooting waves coming in. I think that's like a great foreground that's not often shot. So pretty much getting your butt soaked and sitting in the wave as it comes and trying to capture that as it rolls forward. If you use that shallow depth of field and bump your aperture lower to 2.8, you can also use your subjects. Like in this case, one of my friends, he's not in focus, but it's like he's overlooking this huge waterfall. So play around with that stuff, play around with depth of field, develop a foreground because it really adds cool compositions to your work. It doesn't have to be all about shooting the landscape and that's it, or putting a small person out there. There's so many creative ways that you can kind of use what's natural to what you're doing. So if you're traveling with people, again, if you're using the waves that's on the beach in front of you, it kind of again immerses people within that situation. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say there. Just get low. Don't be afraid if you have to lay down or sit. Yeah, and that's pretty much it on that. And then real quick, I just wanted to touch on it. I'm not a cityscaper. I don't spend as much time in cities and photographing them, but the few times I have, finding foliage and introducing them into a place, it's so different than anything I've seen. For most times when I'm like looking at cityscapes, I'm like, oh, what am I going to see there? I don't see a lot of people doing it cities. So if you're in a city, if you're traveling to a city and you want to just have fun and try to find some new things, look for plants. It sounds really small and really, really little, but it can change the course of how you shoot something. I wanted to give you guys a few fun travel hacks, just things that I've done with my wife that also makes it fun for us, but also it creates cool imagery because it kind of also puts that person that's viewing your photo in that place. So, as you step back and you get that 7 to 14 millimeter wide angle lens on, shoot your feet, shoot your head, shoot your legs dangling off, if you're sitting on a cliffside, if you're on a boat, if you're anywhere at all that you're kind of sitting there and you find yourself like looking at a beautiful landscape. That's a fun way to get some interesting foreground in the photo, is use what's on you. So I get asked a lot like how I shoot for brands and how I started. One of the easiest things I ever did was just hold my hand out holding a product, and I shoot with a 7 millimeter lens, and it just looks like whoever that is, which is me. But people oftentimes don't know that on social media. It's just sitting in this beautiful landscape, and it becomes a cool memory too for you to look back on and be like, remember when we sat there? Remember looking at that landscape and just sitting there? So there's fun ways to mix it up, and that's what's cool about travel and adventure is you kind of create the story you want to tell by just showing the viewer what you do, where you sit, how you take it, and where you go from there. Small tidbit, I wanted to say this earlier and I added it last minute, is just sunrises and sunsets. If you are really aspiring and you're really trying to get better with your work, I can't tell you guys enough how much sunrises and sunsets transformed all of my work. I'm not saying you can't shoot in the middle of the day. Obviously, you can shoot at night and focus on stars, but the light and chasing the light that you see during a sunrise and a sunset, even though it's not all the time, it's such a unique feeling. And I tell my wife this all the time, is nobody's ever going to see this sunset again. So you're capturing a moment in time that, staying up late or waking up early for is something that it just can't be duplicated. Even if there's a similar sunrise later that week or later that year, you are seeing a one-time sunrise with how that light bounces off the peaks. So push yourself. Just remember, light's your best friend. So if you can go pursue the best time of days to shoot, which in my opinion is sunrise and sunsets, that's going to instantly help you with your work. It's all about preparation and execution when it comes to that stuff, because you have to know exactly when to wake up. And in times like right now, I'm waking up at like 4 a.m. and it's just dreadful and daunting and not the easiest thing to do. But if you want to go chase that light, the colors will be worth it. And then lastly, my favorite way to selfie is with an Olympus camera. I don't use my cell phone, um, obviously, because I don't often find myself dropping iPhone photos onto my computer. But when you can flip that LCD screen around, it it just kind of creates a fun moment for you and the person. Just smile, have fun. It's a really simple travel hack for those of you that are not like trying to pursue landscapes full time. I just personally love it. I'm pretty sure Olympus offers it across all their camera bodies, so it doesn't matter what you're shooting with, but you can just flip it around, put your finger on the trigger, make sure your focus is in the middle where your faces are going to be, and snap. Um, I find we have a whole collection of photos, my wife and I, in an album, and it's like hundreds of selfies from around the world. And it's just really fun to look back on. So try it out. Guarantee you'll have some fun with it. Um, and then I told you guys I'd get into a little bit of inspiration. Do what you love. Early on, I took a lot of photos of a lot of random things, trying to be like Instagrammy and this and that. And it came down to, am I enjoying what I'm doing right now? You don't have to be a professional photographer to take photos of what you love. If you ride horses, for example, I don't see a lot of people take cameras on horseback. So I started doing that and riding one-handed, so to speak. But all the photos I've ended up with, I love, and it's something so uniquely different to how you place a viewer inside of that photo. So I can't emphasize it enough. Do what you love. If you have a dog, which is something new to my wife and I's life, take photos of the dog. Use all the things that you've learned here today or from other, photographers along the way. Use the leading lines to kind of get creative with your dog. Use the foliage so it complements and just adds a little bit of color. Do things with your lifestyle and the things you love every day. And don't forget, that's a perfectly good time to challenge yourself compositionally. Um, Same thing. We've really gotten into fly fishing this year, and I was like, at first, I was like, can I even take photos of fly fishing? But it's such a beautiful thing when you're out on the water, and everyone might not feel the same way or might have a totally different passion. But it's taken us some really unique places, and it's just given me a chance to look at landscapes differently. So in this case, it's just a new subject that I've established before a shoot, and I know where I'm going, and I kind of have an idea of what I'm going to shoot, and then you just apply everything you know to what you love, and you'd be surprised how not just receptive people are of that kind of stuff if you can create a beautiful picture from it, but for you, you look back on those moments, you're like, wow, I feel like I'm there again. Um, Same thing, we got a van that we've been converting for the last year. So using that in my subject as a subject for things has been a fun task for me. Just kind of going to a place that I know I want to shoot a road with mountains, but then the van's there. So that's just another fun thing. I wanted to throw in helicopter photos because I know a lot of people do scenic tours where they're traveling. Um, Talk with the pilot beforehand and see if you can kind of curate the experience or talk, on the mic when you're doing it. It's something I love. Like I'll take a drone most places if I know if it's legal and I can fly. But when I'm in a helicopter and I'm able to use my camera to my advantage, it is something I've just come to love doing a lot. So I would encourage you to just do those things that you love. If it's a scenic flight, do it. If it's a hike, do it. If it's anything, just go do what makes you happy, because at the end of the day, that's really what it's going to show in your work how much you love it. Um, it's not always easy. Wait, let me make sure. Oh, wrong side. One sec. It's not always easy to balance kind of the things you love with being a landscape photographer, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes. So just keep trying and keep trying to further your education with the camera. And lastly, I wanted to end with the Farrell Islands, share a few tips about it, see if you guys, maybe if you guys have some questions, ask about it. But they're very simple tips, but something that has just transformed the way I edit is we're going to talk about the HSL panel, so your hue, saturation, and luminance. We're going to talk about shooting during blue hour or at darker moments of the day. And then we're also going to dip a little bit into linear and radial gradients, which also have helped me a ton personally. And as simple as As much as you guys may question editing, I'm a very simple editor. I don't like to do a lot. I kind of have a preset that I've developed over the years, but for the most part, when I'm talking about these things, there's not much more that I do outside of them, outside of very little manipulation with things like contrast or um, exposure if I'm a little off on my initial picture, whatever it is, I keep it fairly simple. So I would suggest if you can master these, it's probably going to help you a lot. HSL panel. So when you're talking about hue, it can be a confusing topic to cover because what exactly is a hue? People ask sometimes. So, what shade of green yellow for me in my photos are we trying to work with? Is there a subtle gradient mixed in with that color shade? So, if you go look at like the grass you've just taken within a photo that's in the foreground, look for the little colors there. If anything, you can always click the little button that's to the left of hue or saturation. Go click on the photo right where you see the color and just drag it up and or side by side, and you'll see that color shifting. Even if it goes to like a crazy purple for a minute, you'll see how it kind of brings colors in and out. For me, like if I'm shooting kind of like a dry climate where it's like a lot of oranges and yellows, I'm really working with those to try to bring it to one solid green. It's sometimes very manipulative, and it kind of changes the context of the entire photo. But for me, I like editing. I like the art to it. I like the post-processing effect that you can have on photos, and just kind of how, I guess, magical you can make them. So, learn your hue. Saturations is a pretty simple one, just the intensity of the color. Do you want it to be like neon green, or do you want it to be like kind of dark and moody? When you're talking about luminance, the reflective brightness of colors, which is it's easy to say, but these things, until you start just dragging them, you just have no goal when you're editing necessarily. Just go drag them around and kind of see what it does to your photos, because that's how I learned to use it. I didn't like read a blog or have someone tell me. I just tried to apply it. So I understood where each piece kind of fit within a photo. Um, and I would just, it sounds counterproductive. And again, I'm kind of unorthodox when it comes to this stuff, but ignore the technicals and just play with the sliders. It will show you how to play with it and what it does. And it will also allow you, so you can see it here, it'll also show you what you can do to future photos. So this spot in the Farrell Islands was just a simple lighthouse that we kind of walked down to. It was very orange at the time, and most of the photos I was ending up with were greener and all the other places, but this location just ended up a little bit oranger. So I was like, I want to try to bring that back. I should have spent a little bit more time, which we'll get into, dropping like a radial filter around the lighthouse so the green isn't as illuminating on that. I could have just bumped down the color, but and I could have also done some stuff to the background as well. But I just wanted to show you guys in the grass how you can have an effect using your HSL panel to change colors as you're editing. Also, don't let the darkness stop you. I know a lot of you are probably late night astrophotographers as well. But as sunset dips and it gets darker and it's blue hour, don't be afraid to bump that ISO up. I didn't do it for a while. I was always like, got to be as low as possible on my ISO chart. Got to keep it low for the sake of the photo. But then when I actually started bumping up ISO a little bit more, I realized that you can play with all of those shadows in your photos almost just as well as you can with a low ISO. Yet, granted, you do get a little bit of grain at times, but if you're sharing on social media like a lot of my work ends up on, that grain is almost just it's just a complementary piece to the photo because it's darker, and I want people to feel kind of it's a late hour, but it's still beautiful. And lastly, contrast. So do you want a soft image or distinct shadows between the light and dark? So oftentimes when I am bumping up that ISO on photos, that's something I do on all my work, but for this specifically with high ISO, I have to mess with my contrast because I like things to pop a little bit more. That difference of light and dark, I really love people to see like, okay, that's just a cool texture. So if you are more of like a soft artistic look, obviously you don't have to mess with it as much, but try bumping that ISO up. bump that contrast up and kind of see what it does to those photos. Because for me personally, I think it brings back a lot of the water that's falling in the waterfall photo. It brings back a lot of the ridges that you see in the photo to the left. It really just kind of adds that piece that I feel like I was maybe missing right before I applied everything else I would normally do. And then lastly, with editing tips, linear versus radial gradients. So we're going to start with linear. As you can see, it was kind of an overcast day, and it probably was raining because that happens a lot in the Farrell Islands. The hills, or the mountain peak in the background, was not as, I guess, vivid as I would like it. Not as much. It didn't pop as much as I would have liked. So you can see the process as you go from right to left. As you drop that linear gradient, you can toggle with those settings and bump that contrast up. You can bump your exposure down, add some clarity if you want, but it starts to bring back a lot of those little tiny elements to the mountain peak that I didn't see it in the raw. So it kind of, again makes me feel more immersed in the photo. So that's always a fun thing to play with. And you can see it here as well. When I dropped a linear gradient on the sky, I didn't want to on the left side. I wanted to use it as an example because I wanted to kind of be overcast. But on the right side, it was white, like wider sky, overexposed a little bit before I dropped that linear gradient. So it brought back the clouds. It brought back some of the blue. A little tiny trick that I use a lot is Dehaze. It's one little tool on there that at the end of an editing session, I always just kind of bump it up a little bit, somewhere between 5 to 15 stops. And I love what it does to my photos. It just, I feel like, creates this very clear photo. It is a little bit heavier on the darks, but for me, with the color, I feel like it balances nicely. Lastly, radial gradients. I gave you two examples. So the initial photo, obviously beautiful, and I still love it. I wanted to bring a little bit more out on the black section where the waterfall is. So you drop a linear gradient. I'm not sure how well you can see it on the screen, but if you look to the left of the waterfall, you'll see a little dot, which is the middle of it. And then I just bumped the shadows up just to give you an idea of what you can play with in certain sections of the photo. And then when I did that, I noticed it kind of pulled away from the village that's right above it. So I dropped another linear gradient on the village where it wouldn't affect the sky and it wouldn't affect anything else. But I wanted to kind of bump the exposure back down to create like a colorful balance to how it's exposed. There's still elements to this photo in general I would change, but for the sake of showing you guys how I apply radial gradients, hopefully that resonates with you guys. Let's see, and one more small ticket item here. I oftentimes use radial gradients on homes or on a subject that I'm shooting. So I know I didn't put a person here, but that's oftentimes a good time to use it because I see darker homes especially kind of get lost when it's a darker day. So putting that radial gradient and slowly working back the exposure where it doesn't feel like, you'll see it when you mess with it, too bright and it doesn't fit. It just brings back some of those details on subjects. So I would definitely play around with your radial gradients and your lineal gradients. I think that's all that I have for you today. So I haven't been watching the comments, but I know Michaela is going to be coming back on. Hopefully I can, answer some questions.
Mm-hmm. We do have some questions coming in, actually. I'm going to just hide there we go. Awesome. Great job. That was super nice. Very helpful.
Thank you.
So a couple of questions did come on, and I think that you might have missed it. What software were you editing with?
Oh, easy question. Lightroom all the way. And I'm not a Photoshopper. I can't do it. I don't know why. So I keep it as simple as possible and just use Lightroom.
Awesome. And somebody wanted to know where the HSL panel was located, but I think they were also asking what software it was, but it's just in that right side, right? In the regular panel.
Yeah. So pretty much you'll go to your right side. You'll see all your basic settings, and then there's a ton of drop down menus, and it will literally say HSL panel in one of those drop down settings on Lightroom. I'm not too familiar with a lot of other editing software, so it might be something. I know there's like variants of it, but you can always mess with colors for the most part on all editing software. So
awesome. So somebody had a question, curious why you so often choose ISO 64. And I did notice that you use that a lot in your images.
I do. Um, I think just the easiest way to put it is during the times of day that I shoot, I don't really need to bump up ISO too often until it's getting darker. So I almost just focus on shutter and f-stop just to kind of keep it simple. And I know with like for me early on I learned, and it was maybe a very basic, even potentially flawed way of learning, but having a low ISO means you're retaining maximum information. So even at 250, 400, 800, you're still retaining all the information. But for me personally, if I can keep it low, I know it's just the colors I want. And for the most part, just every photo I've ever taken with a lower ISO, like under 1,000, it kind of ends up where I want it. So I just kind of stick around that area.
Awesome. So we did just get another question, and I there was a two-part question because there was an autocorrect situation. But do you find HDR or focus bracketing useful? I mean, when you were showing those pictures of the houses, I immediately thought HDR mode would have been awesome for that. So do you use those features?
I've messed with it a few times, and it definitely can work for a lot of situations. So I don't want to caution anyone to not use it. I would definitely say if you have the time and the patience and you are like totally content staying in one place for a long time, use it. For me, it kind of goes back to that be mobile point. It almost feels like I'm just go, go, go all the time. So if I'm shooting a location and I can keep it simple, I won't really dig into my settings too much because I see what I'm shooting and I know it's exactly where I want it to be. And it matches my aesthetic. So, again, if you have the time, I'm not opposed to it. I would probably use it more if I'm like stationary in one place or, not going anywhere. I'm just shooting maybe the Airbnb I'm staying in or something. But when I'm traveling, I try to see as much as possible in one day. So,
That makes sense. I'm a huge fan of HDR mode, though, for the question person. Sorry, I already lost your comment, so I can't respond directly by name. I love HDR mode. It's so cool. So, and I'm not sure if this is part of the editing or just how you shoot, but another question is, love your painterly shots. How do you soften those edges? Because they do almost kind of seem like they have a nice glow to them. Is that part of your editing process?
and then, so you said, how do I shoot you said paint? Is
How
that what you
how do
said?
you soften the edges? Like your photos, like the edges kind of have a dreamy look a lot.
Soften the edges. I actually don't do much to them, so I feel like it's natural maybe to how the photos are taken. I know for me, one reason I love Olympus is because of the edge to edge sharpness. So I don't really feel like I lose a lot of information on the corners. But maybe, and what I'm thinking is when I add contrast to kind of add that light and dark feeling that helps it pop, it probably just kind of creates more of like a immersive hole, so like a window, so to speak, in the photo itself. But I don't necessarily do anything specific that would like touch the edges up. There are some, actually, now that I think about it too, when I shoot foliage, sometimes that initial entrance of grass into the photo is bright and too bright for my like physical visual liking. So I drop a linear gradient on the bottom and I'll just drop the exposure. So instead of you looking at all the roots of the grass, it's just kind of like you start with the tips of the grass. So it kind of brings you up more and kind of leads you into the photo, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. Okay. Do, one more. How often do you use the LCD screen to take your photos?
Um,
Or do you always use your
I,
viewfinder?
I use them a lot for selfies because you have to. Um, I would say maybe 30, 70. So 70, I'm, in the camera and I'm not using the viewfinder, but there are times where, like I said, if you don't be stuck in your height. So if you have to lay down, right, that's one way of like getting down to the ground, but sometimes I don't want to lay down in mud. So I pop that LCD up and I'm lower just naturally. Or if I'm reaching above my head into like a more aerial type of view. So I want to be 7 feet, but I'm not at all. I bump it down so I can see below me. So 30% of the time, I probably try to get creative with the LCD screen.
Yeah. This is probably the most different question I've had today. If you have your camera nearby, can you show us how you hold it when you're on the move?
I do have it. um, I'm just kind of a free holder, so
Same.
kind of just that finger on the trigger at all times. I shoot a lot of vertical, so I'm just kind of hovering over like that. Um, but does that answer? Does that answer? I also find myself like 80% of the time I don't use like a leash around my neck. I love the design of these because I can use it if I need it, but for the most part, it's just kind of holding it. And when I'm driving, it's sitting in my lap like
Right.
all the time. So
I'm a big hike photographer. I love hiking and I love kayaking and stuff like that. So I always have my camera with me. I never use a camera strap. I have the EM1 Mark III EM1 Mark III, I think is what you have as well. And
yep.
it fits perfectly in my hand. So I will hike all day just holding the camera in my hand.
Yeah,
And
it's
I'm just so
incredible
used
how
to it.
like yeah, it's just incredible how lightweight these are, especially when you start like even with the 40 to 150, which is a bigger lens for Olympus, I still feel pretty comfortable holding it. And I'm not going to say I like take one-handed photos with that lens specifically, but I just feel like more I guess long-lasting ability to hold it. Like I'm not going to drop it, and I don't feel like it's too heavy for pretty much anyone. It's just a very lightweight and compact setup.
Speaking of the 40 to 150, I can't find it in the list now, but somebody did ask if you ever use the teleconverters when you're shooting with.
I actually haven't yet, and I've been really wanting to, but once I got my hands on the 100 to 400, it kind of just like gave me that distance, so it's just easier to swap, but um I would absolutely use it if I had my hands on it. Yes.
It's a fair answer. Yeah, I love the
Mhm.
100 to 400. I like the macro that it does. Have you done any
Oh yeah.
macros? Do you shoot any macro stuff ever?
I do actually. I use the 60 millimeter 2.8, right? I think it's 2.8. And Amanda, who's on the Olympus team, suggested I kind of mess with it because just I love foliage. That I think's where the topic came up. And I started using that, and it's a game changer because you don't have to like. I want to shoot my wife's face sometimes just for fun, and like her eye, like just to see what I can do with a pupil. And I'll like get closer to her with a 35 or like the 7 to 14, and it's uncomfortable, but with the 60 I can kind of like stay back and do exactly what I need to do. So yes, I do a lot.
Yeah, I love that lens. It's great. It's a good hiking lens too. If you only have, like, if you're just going on a short hike and it's the only thing you have with you that day, it's still perfect for pretty much anything you want to shoot. So, and
Oh
it's so
yeah.
lightweight.
Yeah, and
I
even
take
like
it.
the
Go
or go
ahead.
ahead.
No,
even
I cut you off.
even the 7 to 14 millimeter, for example, like it performs great with macro situations. I'm not saying you could do exactly what you would do with like the 60 millimeter, um, but just for messing around with plants when you're on a hike, if you're like, oh, the light's kind of reflecting off those right now, and then you just walk over and take a photo, you don't need to switch a lens or anything. It's just kind of like a very diverse lens for all sorts of shooting moments.
So I'm going to ask this question, even though I haven't seen it come through, but usually it does. What is your favorite lens? What's the go-to lens that you take with you when you go out?
7 to 14 millimeter.
I figured that was going to be
Yeah,
it.
it makes it too easy. Like you can zoom in just enough to still make it a big landscape, but there's nothing that I know for any competitor brands that get as wide as a 14 millimeter, which doesn't get affected by, you know, um, all the distortion that you'd get in a lot of wide angle lenses. So it keeps it just where you want it, the perfect depth of field. Definitely my go-to, like 97% of the time.
That's good. I like to hear that. That's a good lens. It's a fun lens. I like to use it for astro too.
Oh yeah.
Yes, to answer the question, somebody just answered yes, he's talking about the 7 to 14. And with that, I think we're going to let Chris go tonight because we're over time, and that's great. And I love that you guys all still hang out and are always here with us every other Thursday night. We will be back again next Thursday. No, not next Thursday. 2 weeks. I got to remember this. It's every other week. You know the drill, guys. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We are going to be talking about spicing up and getting better vacation photos and kind of taking a look around at your surroundings when you're on vacation and how to really get memories that you'll keep with you and feel really proud of later on. So definitely come back and check that out next 2 weeks from now. Man, I can't get that right, guys. We're going to need to get a new host, guys. I don't know what weeks I work. Well, Chris, I just want to thank you for your time, and I appreciate that you were able to come do this with us tonight and share your expertise. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah. And as always, we'll try to get to any comments in the comment section that we haven't answered yet to try to follow up with you guys in the end, because they move quick. You guys know this. And we will definitely see you guys next time. Thank you so much. Thanks, Chris.
Have a good night, guys.